Love is meant to lift us, to give us freedom, warmth, and a sense of connection that nourishes the soul. But sometimes, what feels like love slowly shifts into something darker, something that binds instead of frees, that dictates instead of supports. It starts subtly, a comment that questions your judgment, a suggestion that limits your choices, a concern that masks control. Over time, these small pressures grow, shaping thoughts, actions, and emotions until the very essence of who you are begins to feel confined. Manipulation often hides behind the guise of affection, making it hard to distinguish care from control. The heart, naturally inclined to trust and nurture, may mistake restriction for protection or criticism for love. Yet the truth remains, love that controls is not love at all. Recognizing this hidden danger is the first step toward reclaiming freedom, restoring self-worth, and learning to love in a way that liberates rather than confines. Love is often described as a force that liberates, uplifts, and nurtures the human spirit, yet when it turns into control, it transforms into something far more destructive. True love empowers, it encourages growth, fosters trust, and allows both individuals to flourish while maintaining their autonomy. However, when love crosses the line into control, it ceases to serve as a source of support and becomes a cage, subtle or overt, that confines thoughts, actions, and emotions. This transformation is rarely immediate. It often begins quietly, with small expectations or suggestions that seem reasonable, gradually escalating into a web of restrictions and influence that undermines independence. The essence of control in love is the substitution of freedom with compliance, where one partner's needs, fears, or insecurities dictate the choices and behaviors of the other. This suffocating dynamic corrodes the balance that love requires, replacing mutual respect with dependency and obligation. At the heart of controlling love is the desire to dominate rather than to connect. While love is meant to honor individuality and respect boundaries, control imposes limits subtly or aggressively on what the other person can think, feel, or do. These constraints may manifest as direct commands or as manipulative strategies that make the partner feel guilty, unworthy, or responsible for the other's happiness. Over time, the controlled individual may internalize these pressures, questioning their own judgment, doubting their instincts, and gradually losing touch with their authentic self. The emotional cost is significant. The heart, which once felt safe and cherished, now experiences tension, fear, and the anxiety of walking on eggshells. Love, in its controlling form, becomes a constant negotiation of freedom versus acceptance, leaving the soul depleted and the mind conflicted. Control in love often masquerades as care or protection, which makes it even more insidious. A partner may insist on knowing every decision, monitoring actions, or expressing concern that thinly veils manipulation. For example, suggestions about who one should spend time with, what one should wear, or how one should react can appear protective on the surface, yet they subtly erode autonomy. The controlled partner may rationalize these behaviors as love or devotion, blurring the line between genuine concern and emotional restriction. This manipulation creates a paradox, the very thing meant to make the individual feel valued. The affection or care of a partner becomes the mechanism of their confinement. Over time, the relationship loses its foundation of trust and mutual respect, and the love that once felt nurturing now feels heavy, confining, and suffocating. A key consequence of love turning into control is the gradual erosion of self-worth. When autonomy is restricted and thoughts or feelings are questioned, the controlled partner begins to internalize the belief that their natural impulses or desires are wrong, inadequate, or unacceptable. This undermining of confidence can lead to chronic self-doubt, anxiety, and even depression. The mind, constantly negotiating the expectations of another, becomes hyper-vigilant, weighing every decision against imagined disapproval. Emotional energy is consumed in compliance rather than expression, and the authentic self is forced into hiding. The more one adapts to the controlling patterns, the more the original essence, the person who once acted freely and confidently, fades, leaving behind a shell shaped by the other's dominance. Control also distorts communication and intimacy. True love thrives on honest dialogue, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. But when love becomes controlling, communication is filtered, guarded, and often strategic. The controlled partner may hesitate to share thoughts, feelings, or opinions, fearing judgment, reprisal, or withdrawal of affection. This breakdown in authentic connection creates isolation even within the relationship, where proximity does not equate to emotional closeness. The controlling partner may misinterpret compliance as devotion, unaware that the behavior is driven by fear rather than genuine willingness. The cycle reinforces itself. Control begets compliance, compliance masks resentment, and resentment fosters further control, perpetuating a toxic dynamic that erodes both love and trust. Recognizing the signs of love turning into control is essential for prevention and intervention. Awareness involves noticing patterns of restriction, manipulation, and emotional coercion early, understanding that these behaviors are incompatible with genuine love. Freedom to think, feel, and act independently is not a flaw in a relationship. It is a hallmark of healthy connection. Love that constrains is fundamentally incompatible with emotional well-being. Identifying controlling behaviors allows the individual to assert boundaries, seek support, and make informed choices about whether to remain in or leave the relationship. In doing so, the heart reclaims autonomy and protects the integrity of self, even when love is present. Ultimately, love that turns into control is a distortion of its true nature. While love should inspire trust, growth, and liberation, controlling love suffocates, restricts, and erodes the individual's sense of self. It is a subtle but pervasive threat, often hidden behind gestures of care or concern, and it can leave lasting emotional scars. Recognizing control, understanding its impact, and asserting personal boundaries are critical steps in reclaiming one's heart and mind. True love does not demand obedience or conformity. It honors individuality, nurtures freedom, and uplifts the spirit. By acknowledging the difference, the heart can distinguish between affection that liberates and influence that confines, protecting itself while preserving the possibility for genuine, empowering love. Manipulative love is a subtle, often deceptive force that can masquerade as care, concern, or protection, making it one of the most insidious forms of emotional harm. At first, the behavior may appear reasonable, even thoughtful, creating a sense of security or trust. The partner who seeks to manipulate often frames their control as being for the other's own good, expressing concern about choices, friendships, or decisions in ways that seem supportive. For example, they might insist that a person avoid certain friends for their own safety, or suggest that certain choices are irresponsible or unwise. On the surface, these behaviors are cloaked in affection, creating a tension between gratitude for perceived care and the discomfort of growing restriction. The emotional confusion that arises makes it difficult to recognize manipulation as what it truly is, an attempt to dominate, influence, or limit the autonomy of another under the guise of love. Manipulative love is powerful precisely because it appeals to natural human instincts to trust, reciprocate, and care for those we love. When someone expresses control under the pretense of concern, the heart is primed to believe that these actions stem from affection, loyalty, or a desire to protect. This is particularly true when the manipulative partner understands the vulnerabilities, insecurities, or fears of the other person and exploits them. A subtle comment about appearance, decisions, or behavior may trigger self-doubt, guilt, or anxiety, creating a dependency on the controlling partner for reassurance. Over time, the recipient of this manipulation begins to second-guess their own judgment, feeling as though independence might betray the relationship or provoke disapproval. The line between guidance and coercion blurs, leaving the controlled partner uncertain about what is truly supportive versus what is constraining. One of the most insidious aspects of manipulative love is that it often erodes self-confidence without immediate awareness. Because the controlling partner frames restrictions as care, the recipient may initially internalize criticism or limits as helpful guidance rather than manipulation. This gradual erosion of autonomy can take months or years to fully recognize. Small intrusions into decision making, frequent suggestions dressed as advice, or emotional pressure to conform can all accumulate, subtly shaping the person's behavior, choices, and thought patterns. The individual may feel grateful for the attention or guidance, while simultaneously experiencing an unspoken discomfort that they cannot easily articulate. Manipulation works because it exploits trust and affection, creating a cycle where compliance is rewarded with approval, reinforcing the behavior and masking the harm it causes. Manipulative love often operates through psychological tactics that appeal to guilt, fear, or obligation. For instance, a partner may imply that failure to comply indicates a lack of love, devotion, or loyalty. Emotional expressions such as disappointment, withdrawal, or silent treatment are frequently used to enforce compliance without explicit confrontation. These behaviors create an environment where the controlled partner becomes hyper aware of their actions, words, and decisions, constantly evaluating how they will be received. The result is heightened anxiety, internal conflict, and diminished self-assurance. The heart, naturally inclined to seek connection and validation, may interpret these reactions as normal or deserved, further entrenching the pattern of manipulation. The subtlety of these tactics makes it difficult for the controlled partner to recognize the pattern as abusive, particularly because love, care, and intimacy remain present in other aspects of the relationship. Manipulative love also thrives on the isolation of the controlled individual. By casting doubt on external support systems, friends, family, or colleagues, the manipulative partner can increase dependency and limit exposure to alternative perspectives. Suggestions that others do not have one's best interests at heart, or warnings that outside influences are harmful, often encourage withdrawal from independent relationships. This isolation strengthens the manipulative partner's influence, reducing opportunities for the controlled individual to validate their experiences or gain clarity from unbiased voices. In this way, manipulation functions both emotionally and socially, reshaping the controlled partner's perception of the world, their choices, and even themselves. Love becomes a vehicle for limitation rather than liberation. Recognizing manipulative love requires discernment, reflection, and self-awareness. It is essential to differentiate between genuine care and control disguised as concern. Genuine care encourages autonomy, respects boundaries, and allows for mistakes without judgment or coercion. Manipulative love, in contrast, exerts influence through guilt, fear, or obligation and seeks to shape behavior rather than support growth. Patterns of emotional pressure, subtle restrictions, and dependency signals indicate that what is being presented as love is actually a form of control. Awareness of these patterns is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy, setting boundaries, and protecting emotional well-being. Ultimately, manipulative love is dangerous because it undermines the very foundation of a healthy relationship: trust, respect, and freedom. While it may appear as devotion or concern, its impact is restrictive, confusing, and emotionally taxing. The heart, naturally receptive to care, is especially vulnerable to this form of manipulation, making it critical to recognize the difference between love that nurtures and love that confines. Understanding the hidden dynamics of manipulation allows the individual to protect themselves, restore autonomy, and seek relationships that are truly supportive, empowering, and free. Through discernment, reflection, and boundary setting, it is possible to break the cycle, reclaim personal power, and rebuild a foundation of love that is genuine, respectful, and liberating. Emotional and psychological control in relationships is one of the most damaging aspects of love that has turned toxic because it slowly erodes self-worth, autonomy, and the ability to trust one's own judgment. At its core, love should inspire confidence, foster independence, and create a safe space where both partners can grow individually and together. However, when control and manipulation take root, these fundamental aspects are replaced with restriction, doubt, and fear. The controlled partner begins to question their decisions, second, guess their feelings, and rely on the controlling individual to define what is acceptable, safe, or right. Over time, this creates a dynamic where the heart and mind are no longer fully free, but are constrained by the expectations, insecurities, or demands of another person. Autonomy, once taken for granted, gradually becomes a source of conflict rather than a natural right, and the individual's sense of self-worth begins to diminish as their ability to act independently erodes. One of the key ways control manifests is through the manipulation of thoughts and perceptions. A controlling partner often frames criticism, suggestions, or disapproval as care or guidance, blurring the line between concern and dominance. Statements that initially seem constructive can carry subtle messages that undermine confidence, questioning choices, expressing disappointment, or implying that the partner is incapable of making sound decisions. These repeated patterns of psychological influence gradually shift the controlled partner's internal narrative. Instead of trusting their instincts and judgment, they begin to internalize the controlling partner's worldview, measuring their self-worth against the approval or disapproval they receive. This internalized control can be devastating because it turns the mind itself into a site of restriction where even personal reflection and decision-making are filtered through the lens of external influence. Control also operates through the restriction of freedom in both overt and subtle ways. Some controlling partners explicitly dictate behavior, demanding compliance in daily activities, social interactions, or personal choices. Others use more covert tactics, such as guilt, emotional withdrawal, or veiled threats, to steer decisions in their favor. These tactics create an environment in which the controlled partner is constantly evaluating their actions to avoid conflict or disapproval, which generates chronic anxiety and emotional exhaustion. The constant monitoring of behavior, whether implicit or explicit, reinforces the sense that personal autonomy is contingent on the other person's validation. The heart, initially open and trusting, begins to feel constrained, confined, and even fearful, as the energy that should flow freely into connection and intimacy is instead consumed by the effort to navigate control and avoid punishment. A particularly harmful consequence of emotional control is the erosion of self-esteem. When a person's choices, opinions, or emotions are consistently undermined or judged, they may begin to believe that they are inadequate, incapable, or unworthy of love unless they conform to the controlling partner's standards. This loss of self-confidence creates a cycle in which dependency grows. The controlled partner increasingly relies on the manipulator for validation, guidance, and permission. Over time, the individual may feel as though they cannot function without the other person's input, losing the ability to trust their own judgment. The heart, which should thrive in love, becomes tentative, cautious, and self-critical, eroding the foundation of a healthy sense of self. Trust, both in oneself and in others, is another casualty of control. In healthy relationships, trust allows partners to communicate openly, express vulnerability, and make decisions with confidence. In controlling dynamics, however, trust is weaponized or undermined. The manipulative partner may sow doubt, question motives, or impose secrecy under the guise of concern, leading the controlled individual to second-guess their perceptions and memories. Over time, this creates a sense of confusion and self-doubt as the mind struggles to reconcile conflicting messages from the heart and from the controlling partner. Trust in oneself erodes first, followed by diminished trust in others, leaving the individual isolated, dependent, and emotionally constrained. Control also disrupts authentic connection and intimacy. When one partner exerts psychological dominance, the other may feel unsafe sharing thoughts, feelings, or desires for fear of judgment or retribution. This creates a barrier to emotional closeness as communication becomes filtered, guarded, and strategic. The controlled partner may comply outwardly while internally experiencing resentment, frustration, or despair, which further deepens emotional distance. The paradox is that love, which is meant to bring connection and mutual understanding, becomes a mechanism of alienation and isolation, leaving the heart longing for freedom even within the relationship. Breaking free from the effects of emotional and psychological control requires recognition, awareness, and deliberate action. Understanding that love should not require compliance or obedience is the first step. Identifying patterns of manipulation, setting boundaries, and seeking support from trusted friends, family, or professionals can help the individual reclaim autonomy and restore confidence. Rebuilding the ability to trust one's judgment, to act independently, and to honor personal desires is crucial in restoring emotional health. It is only by asserting these boundaries and reclaiming agency that the heart can recover from control and begin to experience love in a way that empowers rather than confines. Ultimately, when love turns into control, it ceases to be love in its true form. Emotional and psychological domination undermines autonomy, self-worth, and the capacity to trust oneself, replacing freedom with anxiety, dependence, and self-doubt. Recognizing these patterns, understanding their impact, and reclaiming personal power are essential steps toward emotional liberation. True love uplifts, nurtures, and respects individuality, while control constricts, manipulates, and diminishes. By reclaiming autonomy and setting boundaries, the heart can move from suffocation to freedom, rediscovering the capacity to love in a healthy, empowering, and authentic way. Boundaries are the cornerstone of healthy relationships, serving as invisible yet vital lines that protect one's emotional, mental, and physical well-being. In relationships where love turns into control and manipulation, boundaries are often tested, ignored, or deliberately eroded, leaving the individual vulnerable to influence, coercion, and emotional harm. Establishing and maintaining boundaries is not an act of selfishness, it is a fundamental expression of self, respect, and personal integrity. Boundaries allow individuals to define what is acceptable in terms of behavior, communication, and treatment, and they provide a framework for ensuring that emotional needs are recognized and honored. Without boundaries, love can become a tool of confinement, where one person's desires or insecurities dictate the thoughts, actions, and even emotions of the other, leaving the heart feeling trapped and the mind uncertain. Recognizing the need for boundaries begins with self-awareness. Understanding one's own values, limits, and emotional triggers is essential in identifying when behavior crosses into control or manipulation. For instance, a person might notice discomfort when their choices are questioned excessively or when affection is withheld as a form of compliance. These feelings are signals that boundaries are being tested. By acknowledging and respecting these internal cues, individuals can begin to define limits that preserve their autonomy and sense of self. Boundaries are not arbitrary, they are deeply connected to personal dignity and emotional health, serving as a safeguard against the subtle encroachment of manipulation. Setting boundaries requires clarity and communication. It is one thing to feel that a line has been crossed internally, but another to assert that line externally in a way that is firm, respectful, and consistent. For example, a partner might say, "I value your opinions and care about your perspective, but I need to make this decision for myself," thereby asserting autonomy without hostility or accusation. Clear communication about limits reduces ambiguity and ensures that the relationship operates on a foundation of mutual understanding rather than silent compliance. It allows both partners to engage consciously, respecting each other's individuality while maintaining emotional intimacy. Boundaries are not meant to isolate or punish. They are a framework for healthy interaction and mutual respect. Consistency in maintaining boundaries is equally crucial. A boundary that is occasionally enforced and occasionally ignored loses its effectiveness and confuses both partners. Manipulative individuals often test boundaries repeatedly, using guilt, persuasion, or emotional displays to erode them over time. Consistency signals that personal limits are non-negotiable, that autonomy is essential, and that love cannot be measured by compliance or submission. Maintaining boundaries requires courage, as it often involves confronting behaviors that provoke discomfort or resistance from the other person. It is through this consistent reinforcement that the heart reclaims authority over its own choices, reinforcing self, respect, and emotional stability. Boundaries also play a protective role in preventing emotional exhaustion and burnout. In relationships dominated by control, the constant negotiation of another person's desires, fears, or expectations consumes mental and emotional energy. Over time, this depletion can manifest as anxiety, resentment, or diminished self-worth. By establishing clear boundaries, individuals create a buffer that allows them to conserve energy, maintain perspective, and protect their emotional reserves. Boundaries serve as a reminder that love is not about sacrificing one's identity or autonomy for another, but about engaging in a partnership where both individuals thrive and feel respected. Importantly, boundaries are not static. They evolve as individuals grow and circumstances change. What might have been an acceptable compromise in the early stages of a relationship may later become a source of discomfort or strain. Regular reflection on personal limits ensures that boundaries remain aligned with evolving needs, values, and emotional capacities. This ongoing adjustment is a form of self-care, signaling that the heart and mind are actively engaged in safeguarding personal well-being. In this way, boundaries are both protective and dynamic, providing structure without rigidity and ensuring that love does not slip into coercion or control. Establishing boundaries also creates the conditions for healthier, more authentic relationships. By clearly defining what is acceptable, both partners gain insight into each other's needs, expectations, and emotional capacities. Boundaries reduce ambiguity, foster mutual respect, and encourage collaboration rather than domination. In relationships free from manipulation, boundaries serve as a framework for open communication, trust, and shared responsibility. They signal that love is not measured by compliance but by the capacity to honor individuality, nurture growth, and support autonomy. Boundaries transform love from a mechanism of control into a space of freedom, safety, and genuine connection. Ultimately, boundaries are a vital tool in reclaiming personal power when faced with control and manipulation. They protect self-worth, reinforce autonomy, and create clarity in relationships, preventing the heart from being constrained by another's insecurities or desires. By recognizing the importance of limits, communicating them clearly, and maintaining them consistently, individuals safeguard their emotional health while preserving the potential for love that is empowering rather than confining. Boundaries are not merely defensive mechanisms, they are the foundation of respect, dignity, and authentic connection, ensuring that love nurtures rather than controls, uplifts rather than confines, and strengthens the heart instead of diminishing it. Understanding the signs of manipulation is essential for maintaining clarity, autonomy, and emotional well-being in relationships where love has turned controlling. Manipulation is often subtle, wrapped in expressions of care, concern, or affection, which makes it difficult to recognize, particularly for someone deeply invested in the relationship. It operates by appealing to natural human desires to please, nurture, and maintain connection, and it often exploits insecurities, vulnerabilities, or past experiences. The first step in recognizing manipulation is developing awareness of patterns and behaviors that consistently undermine autonomy, distort reality, or create emotional dependence. Recognizing these signs is not about suspicion or paranoia. It is about observing the dynamic of the relationship and discerning whether love is empowering or constraining. By identifying manipulation, the individual can take steps to protect themselves, assert boundaries, and rebuild emotional clarity, ensuring that the love they experience is genuine and nurturing rather than controlling and damaging. Manipulation in relationships often begins subtly, making it difficult to detect in the early stages. A partner may present controlling behavior as helpful guidance, concern for safety, or protection from imagined harm. For example, comments about who one should spend time with, what is appropriate to wear, or how to respond in social situations may initially appear supportive. However, repeated influence over choices, combined with emotional cues such as disappointment, guilt, or withdrawal, signals that the behavior is less about care and more about control. By observing whether these interventions enhance autonomy or restrict it, one can begin to distinguish genuine guidance from manipulative patterns. Over time, the cumulative effect of these behaviors can create dependency, erode confidence, and make the individual question their own judgment, even though the actions are framed as love. Another common sign of manipulation is the use of guilt and obligation to influence behavior. Manipulative partners often frame compliance as a measure of devotion or love, implying that failure to meet their expectations indicates a lack of commitment or care. This tactic exploits emotional bonds, making the individual feel responsible for the partner's happiness or emotional stability. The result is a dynamic in which choices are no longer freely made, but are dictated by the perceived need to maintain affection or avoid conflict. Emotional energy is consumed in managing the partner's reactions rather than in authentic self-expression, leaving the controlled individual feeling trapped, anxious, and increasingly uncertain about their own feelings and desires. Recognizing guilt-based influence as a form of manipulation is crucial for reclaiming autonomy and emotional clarity. Isolation is another indicator that love has turned manipulative. A controlling partner may subtly discourage friendships, family interactions, or outside activities, framing these restrictions as concern for the individual's well-being or as a need to prioritize the relationship. This isolation limits exposure to alternative perspectives, advice, and emotional support, making the individual more dependent on the controlling partner for validation, decision-making, and emotional stability. Manipulation thrives in environments where alternative voices are silenced, and the controlled individual has fewer opportunities to recognize unhealthy patterns. Awareness of isolation tactics allows the person to actively seek and maintain supportive relationships, reducing the manipulator's ability to dominate perceptions, decisions, and emotions. Another hallmark of manipulation is inconsistent reinforcement of behavior. Manipulative partners often alternate between affection and criticism, praise and withdrawal, creating an emotional environment that is unpredictable and disorienting. This push-pull dynamic conditions the individual to comply in hopes of receiving approval, affection, or reconciliation, while fear of disapproval drives behavioral adjustment. Over time, the controlled partner becomes hyper-vigilant, constantly evaluating their actions to avoid negative reactions, which reduces authenticity and increases emotional strain. Recognizing these patterns helps individuals understand that compliance is not an indicator of love, but a response to psychological pressure designed to maintain control. Gaslighting is a particularly damaging form of manipulation that distorts reality and undermines self-trust. A partner may deny statements, events, or feelings, causing the individual to question their perception, memory, or judgment. While subtle at first, repeated gaslighting creates confusion, self-doubt, and emotional dependency, making it increasingly difficult for the controlled partner to trust themselves. Recognizing patterns of distortion, denial, or blame shifting is critical for identifying manipulative love and safeguarding mental and emotional health. Awareness empowers the individual to assert reality, validate their experiences, and resist the erosion of confidence caused by manipulation. Finally, recognizing manipulation involves reflecting on the overall impact of the relationship. Love that is healthy and genuine empowers, respects boundaries, and nurtures growth, while manipulative love constrains, diminishes self-worth, and creates dependency. By evaluating whether the relationship consistently supports autonomy, emotional well-being, and authentic connection, individuals can discern whether love is empowering or controlling. Awareness of manipulation is the foundation for setting boundaries, reclaiming personal power, and restoring the ability to love and trust in a healthy, authentic way. Ultimately, understanding the signs of manipulation allows the individual to reclaim agency and protect the heart from harm. Awareness does not require suspicion, but encourages discernment, reflection, and self-respect. Recognizing subtle patterns of control, guilt, isolation, inconsistent reinforcement, and gaslighting equips the individual with the tools to differentiate between genuine love and toxic influence. By observing these signs, asserting boundaries, and seeking clarity, one can navigate relationships consciously, ensuring that love remains liberating, supportive, and empowering rather than confining, manipulative, or destructive. Healing from controlled or manipulative relationships is a complex, deeply personal process that requires time, reflection, and deliberate effort. When love shifts into control, the heart and mind are often left battered, confused, and uncertain about trust, boundaries, and self-worth. The aftermath of such a relationship can leave lingering emotional scars, self-doubt, and difficulty in connecting authentically with others. Healing begins with acknowledging the harm done and validating one's own experiences without minimizing pain or rationalizing the manipulator's behavior. Accepting that the relationship was harmful, regardless of the love or affection that existed, is crucial in creating a foundation for emotional recovery. This initial step involves honesty with oneself, recognizing both the manipulative patterns and the ways they impacted autonomy, self-confidence, and emotional resilience. Without this acknowledgement, the path to recovery may be obstructed by denial, lingering attachment, or self-blame. Self-reflection is a cornerstone of healing. After a relationship marked by control, individuals often carry unresolved emotions, internalized criticism, or confusion about their own judgment. Reflecting on these experiences helps untangle the emotional entanglement created by manipulation, allowing the individual to distinguish between genuine self-perception and the distorted beliefs imposed by the controlling partner. Journaling, therapy, or introspective practices such as meditation can facilitate this process, providing space to process grief, anger, and disappointment. Self-reflection also enables the recognition of patterns, both in the relationship and within oneself, that may have contributed to the vulnerability to manipulation. Understanding these patterns is empowering, as it equips the individual with insight to avoid repeating similar dynamics in future relationships. Rebuilding confidence and self-worth is an essential aspect of healing. Controlled relationships often erode autonomy and foster self-doubt, leaving individuals questioning their value and abilities. Restoring confidence involves deliberate actions that reinforce independence, competence, and self-respect. This can include making personal decisions without seeking validation, pursuing passions or hobbies that affirm individuality, or setting and maintaining boundaries in new contexts. Each act of self-assertion, no matter how small, strengthens the internal sense of agency and restores trust in one's own judgment. Over time, these practices rebuild the foundation of self-esteem, allowing the individual to re-engage with the world from a position of empowerment rather than dependency. Forgiveness, though often misunderstood, is an important component of healing. This does not mean condemning harmful behavior or reconciling with the manipulative partner. Rather, it involves releasing the grip of resentment and anger that can prolong emotional suffering. Forgiveness allows the individual to reclaim emotional energy that was previously tied up in anger, blame, or regret. It is a conscious choice to stop allowing the past to dictate the present, enabling the heart to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. By practicing forgiveness, individuals can focus on growth, self-care, and the cultivation of healthy connections rather than being consumed by past wounds. Re-establishing healthy boundaries is also crucial during recovery. After experiencing manipulation, the ability to recognize and assert limits may be diminished, leaving the individual vulnerable to repeated patterns of control. Healing involves redefining what is acceptable in relationships, communicating those limits clearly, and enforcing them consistently. Boundaries provide both protection and clarity, signaling to oneself and others that autonomy, dignity, and emotional safety are non-negotiable. They act as a framework for future interactions, ensuring that love and connection do not come at the expense of personal integrity or freedom. Another key aspect of recovery is rebuilding the capacity to trust. Manipulative relationships often leave individuals wary of others, fearful of deception, or hesitant to open up emotionally. Healing involves learning to trust one's own judgment first, validating personal perceptions and instincts before relying on external validation. Gradually, this restored self-trust can extend to new relationships, allowing for authentic vulnerability without the anxiety and hyper-vigilance cultivated by past manipulation. Trust in oneself and in others is rebuilt slowly through consistent self-awareness, boundary setting, and positive relational experiences. Healing also involves cultivating self-compassion and patience. Recovery is not linear. Setbacks, lingering doubts, and emotional triggers are natural and expected. Treating oneself with kindness, acknowledging progress, and forgiving oneself for perceived mistakes are essential components of emotional restoration. Engaging in self-care, nurturing supportive relationships, and investing in personal growth reinforce the understanding that one is deserving of love, respect, and autonomy. Ultimately, healing from manipulative or controlling love is about reclaiming the self. It is a journey of restoring confidence, autonomy, and emotional clarity, learning to recognize and assert boundaries, and cultivating the ability to engage in healthy, authentic relationships. Through self-reflection, forgiveness, trust, building, and self-compassion, the individual can emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient, prepared to love again in ways that honor freedom, respect, and genuine connection. Healing transforms the pain of manipulation into insight and empowerment, allowing the heart to recover, flourish, and embrace the possibility of love that truly nurtures rather than confines. Love, in its truest form, is meant to liberate, nurture, and inspire growth. Yet when it becomes controlling or manipulative, it suffocates the heart, erodes self-worth, and distorts trust. Recognizing the subtle signs of control, understanding manipulation, and asserting boundaries are essential steps in reclaiming autonomy and emotional clarity. Healing from such relationships requires reflection, self-compassion, and the courage to restore confidence and trust in oneself. By reclaiming personal power and setting limits, the heart learns that love does not demand compliance but flourishes through respect, freedom, and authenticity. Ultimately, the journey through manipulation and control, though painful, can awaken resilience, wisdom, and the ability to cultivate connections that empower rather than confine. True love uplifts the soul, it never diminishes it, and it honors the individuality and freedom of both partners.